Okay, so we will get into it. So, why your 2026 data budget is setting you up to fail. Little bit provocative, I would imagine, but certainly some food for thought, and we'll try and cover as much of that food for thought as we're going through the session. To start with, though, my name is Greg Freeman. I'm the CEO and founder of Data Literacy Academy. We are a organization that partners with enterprise organizations to help them roll out data and AI literacy and culture programs at scale. Our specialist area is on the business side of data. So we don't really do that much work with data professionals, in honesty. For us, it's about how do we bring the wider organization, the 97, 98% of people who are not already on the journey and are not already experts on their own data journey and bring them up to speed from a mindset, a behaviors, and a skills perspective. I'll hand over to Jason to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Greg. And hi, everyone. Lovely to have you here. Looking forward to the session. I'm Jason. I'm the founder and chief executive at Synergore. I'm the author of Data Means Business. I'm really looking forward to talking to you. At Synergore, we're a consultancy that helps leadership and their teams ensure that data and AI properly translates into clear, hopefully P&L impact, but impact in some way, depending on what industry you're in. In our experience, companies can spend a hell of a lot of money on platforms and teams and models and experiments and all sorts of stuff, and then struggle to turn that into something that they would call ROI, or faster decisions or better business outcomes. And we're normally brought into organizations to help solve that, basically. So looking forward to the discussion with Greg and see what has in store today.
Oh, Jason's so much better at his intro. He remembers that he's an author. I've not got used
You're
to that
so new
yet.
to it. I've been in the game for a
Promote the
while.
book as you go. I agree. Yeah. So yes, promotion of Data Means Business as a book is a very good lens to take. Um, so in today's session, the way we'll work is we'll work through some slides, but really the thing that I want to get across most from this is mine and Jason's experience and opinions and kind of thoughts on the topics that are on the slides, not just presenting slides. I'm gonna talk through what's on a slide, and then I will ask Jason for his opinion, what he's seeing. I'll feed some of my own in, but we'll go through the current and future investment landscape, how your budget might be blocking the value realization that Jason mentioned there, and ideally building a balanced budget model, which I would say is something I've not seen done that well across the industry. So, the problem we're here to discuss, and I think this is a key one, and it's very relevant right now, is that every enterprise is buying straight into the hype cycle around AI. I don't think anybody can question that. There's a few that are locking the doors down, but in general, the premise is how can we get to delivering AI at scale faster? How can that deliver value for us? And it's a very similar story in some ways as it was 10 years ago around the data hype cycle and how we're going to get all our data in order and how we're going to derive value from that. As a lot of people know, that hasn't panned out as we expected. And part of the reason that we've got to question and critically think about the AI hype cycle is that a lot of organizations are still stuck in a position of organizational readiness that they were in 2019, if not actually like even earlier than that. Like some organizations haven't moved on that far in the last decade around how they're collating, aggregating, using data for decision making. So the idea of building AI tools, AI products, AI value on top of that scenario is a really difficult one to get your head around because we all know great data, better AI. Not very good data, less good AI. So I think what we need to do is just get our head around that as a statement to start off with. And this is where, once I've kind of talked through this, I'm going to bring Jason in to kind of wrap up his thoughts on that problem statement, but also how that applies in the context of the paradox that we're talking about here, which is budget related. So, AI spend is absolutely booming. Any number that begins with a T is a big one. So, the 2025 projected total global spend from Gartner is $1.5 trillion. We're not talking small pounds and pence here. We're talking massive investment at scale And I presume, as with most things in business, the idea is that we see some sort of return on that. Similarly, and want something that's been growing quite year on year for a while now, BI spend is booming. So 10.74% projected spend growth rate year on year of BI to 2033. The growth rate of BI has already been exponential. The spend on BI is already exponential. So by 2033, with another 10% a year, we're talking mega money again. But actually, when you get into the details of who's using this stuff, it isn't reflective of that amount of spend. So only 8% of employees are using advanced analytics on a regular basis, whether that's creating, using for decisioning. However, 24% of the companies are going to triple their spend on advanced analytics in the next 12 months. Again, the maths doesn't add up in terms of the adoption, the value being realized. And according to a lot of the research that's out there, skills are still a major inhibitor in this space. So 68% of employees cite lack of AI skills, and 89% of orgs are expected to adopt generative AI by 2027. So if you've got 68% of employees who are saying, we don't get it, we've not been brought on this journey, yet you've got 89% of businesses who are spending money, throwing cash at getting this deployed across the enterprise, maybe upgrading from Copilot Chat to Copilot Enterprise licenses. There's a clear disconnect in the way you're going to generate value, derive adoption, etc. So, with that in mind, Jason, taking that problem statement of the hype cycle and business maturity and readiness, together with fairly significant investment in the technology space and the tooling space, where does that leave you from a thought process perspective, and what are you seeing as the way this is maybe enhancing some of the challenges we face in the data and AI space?
It's interesting. The I think the hype and the level of investment you're seeing there are connected. So the hype drives the investment drives the hype, and in some ways, certainly in the AI space, that there's talk of that bubble sort of bursting. What I don't think will burst is the appetite to try and make this actually work and make it successful. But I think from a hype perspective, I often actually think that hype can be a good thing, certainly for data teams to try and drive some interest in the topic that they're talking about, that they're responsible for, try and drive some budget and get some investment done. So I think you can use hype in a really positive way, but there's a sort of danger that you overuse the hype and you set your expectations so high, or you leave expectations so high that it's then really hard to deliver against those, to kind of live up to the expectations and the hype that's been set. So it's about trying to kind of get that balance right, but certainly use it to drive investment. I think always take that. Back when I was in industry, it was when big data was the phrase and first came out, and I used that brazenly when I was at M&S to drive interest in what we were doing, get innovation budget, get spend in new things, do things in different ways because it had this newness about it. But actually, it was then about getting on with it and delivering some really strong, impactful stuff for the organization, not just spending the cash that I managed to get. So I think that's a big thing. I think the this kind of level of readiness is a really interesting one because you're never ready for the thing that's coming because it's down the way. You're driving the train whilst laying the track always, which is quite a hard thing to do often. And I don't think I've seen a CDO or an organization be able to sort of pause the train at the station, lay the track perfectly, to extend this analogy, and then plonk the train down and drive merrily to the next stop. So that's a real challenge of how do you continually iterate, evolve the maturity and the readiness of an organization to do the next thing, whilst also making sure that the thing you set out to do is deliverable and achievable.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to have a think while I'm just talking about my bit about whether you've seen a scenario where you've been brought in because the hype has been ridden and then it's not delivered, and then like what did you do to pick it back up? So I'll give an example. I'll give a really interesting case while I give you a chance to think about that. But the other thing that I see a lot of, and I think there's some really interesting use cases from enterprises we've been in and around, is I think there's a massive appetite from data offices to spend money on the technology, and they don't see that as a concern point. It's like, well, that's just big budget, and that's what we've asked for, and that's what we've got, so let's spend it. What I see less of is almost like willingness and appetite and bravery, I'd call it, for radical change. So,
Mm,
really interesting use case with one of the large retailers where they basically picked their new technology stack, they picked their new business intelligence tool, and they just decided they were going to switch it off on a Friday, switch the new one off on a Monday, and kind of see how it played out. And actually, that's worked really effectively for them. It was very brave. It was very brazen, to use a word that you used there, and I like the word brazen. It was very brazen of them, but actually, it was radical change at scale, which delivered adoption because people had no other choice. I think I see
mm.
a lot of spend on a new BI tool, spend on a new data platform, but actually not the willingness to just go, the best way to get people to adopt it is to switch off the old one and let's see what they need, like let's get them using what they need to use. So yeah, I just thought I'd kind of flag that as I think there is a disconnect, and these numbers reflect that between the amount of money people are willing to spend on the technology but the decision and cultural bravery that they're willing to take to actually get this thing transferred and adopted. But anyway, any examples from your
Well,
background where?
well, just reflect on that point because where you spend money, sort of almost like I won't take it to politics, but it's like the budget we've just had in the UK. So it's budgets about choices, aren't they, and priorities, and often budget goes on technology and implementing technology. So that's the choice you've made, and that's the priority you've made, and that's where the lion's share of the focus goes. So if your budget reflects that choice, then you haven't left anything for the bit you've talked about, which is like how do we really make this
Yeah,
impactful in the organization and embed itself in the way the organization works and into people's workflows and processes. Like we've got to invest, and of course, it's relative because technology costs a fair bit of money, but so does engagement and
yeah,
implementation and adoption and all those things. So it's about getting that balance right. Your question about organizations where they've sort of ridden the hype and then not delivered. This is I would say the common problem statement right now, like literally right now. In I think not even just in the UK, but in across Europe and in US and organisations that we talk to, is that um, people have been able to get budget off the back of high expectation and riding that hype without huge commitment of what that will deliver, just an understanding and a leap of faith and some courage actually from organizations to say, well, this AI thing, this data thing, we know there's some value here, we should invest in it. So build the capabilities
yeah,
to allow us to get better at that, data and AI with the expectation that something will come from it. And now we're in a phase where that investment's in some, not everywhere, of course, but that investment has been made. And now we're looking at, well, it's sort of showtime. And people are turning to things like data culture, for example, because if we can change the culture, then they'll start using the thing, and then it's like, oh, hang on, it's hard to change culture without doing something. So like, well, how do we get things done? Or maybe we'll look at product management. So people are like looking at different techniques now to almost manifest the value that should have been baked in from the start. So 8 out of 10 pieces of work that we've done in the last 12 months, and certainly can see in the next 12 months, are normally this problem statement of spent, invested, not got the value, certainly not as much as they planned, or if any. And now it's now what do we do now? What do we do next?
100%. And I think one of my clear observations over the last few years is people see the people, the technology, the people, the skills, the culture as either an afterthought or a fix to a problem they've created for themselves. Whereas the best programs we've run are the ones where they've been considered in direct alignment to the deployment of the data platform, the deployment of the BI
Yeah.
tool, the deployment of the products.
Mm.
Because some people are like, oh well, is that not a bit like cart before the horse? And it's like no, because you actually need a warm, ready audience when you're spending the kind of money that's on the screen. If you're looking for a 12-month window to follow that massive spend where you just like hope is not a strategy, right? Like I think a lot of people, their adoption strategy is hope. or investing more money with a big consultancy, which is another option. And neither probably work that well from what I observe. I think having either a partner like yourselves who really understands the space deeply and isn't so generalist as the big SIs can be, or really materially considering the people part of the transformation just seems to
Mm.
work far better than the way that most people are doing things right now. Um, okay, so this is from your own research. Probably the most interesting for people on the call, which will be organizations over 500 million in revenue. So the biggest blockers to moving faster with data and AI, according to your aggregated research from across the industry, is legacy systems and outdated technology infrastructure, followed by quality of data, governance, or access challenges.
Yeah.
Why do you think it is that in a world where businesses are spending the numbers we just looked at on technology every year, the narrative that comes from the industry as the blocker is still that the technology is the blocker? So like
Yeah.
where's the disconnect there?
Because everyone's crazy. No,
Cool.
the no. Look, so this is about legacy technology. What tends to happen is new technology gets deployed and old technology doesn't. So the plan is to replace something, but then as you get in, this happens in all sectors actually, but particularly ones that have been kind of more mature and been around for a long time in ways. So I'm sort of thinking financial services, things like insurance, where there's a very sort of legacy operating model and it's been around for a long time and it's hard to change. Um, you kind of as you unpick, you start to find that the thing that you had is critical somewhere and you can't change it. And if you do, you sort of unpick this spaghetti. So you sort of build something on top. So the aspiration is always replace what was there and make it modern and make it better. But often you never see that through. And interestingly, even if the plan is to see it through, you run out of money because um, because you need to keep spending to undo the challenges of legacy, but you haven't delivered any value because you haven't got to the point where you've delivered the things to then deliver the value, which earns you the right to get some more budget to sort of finish the job. So we see many times that you just build legacy upon legacy. Um, and I'll give you an example. At one client that we worked with recently, the project was to essentially, in their minds, was to replace their old data warehouse for a new shiny sort of cloud-based data platform in some of the latest tooling. But what we found when we got under the covers was that this data warehouse wasn't simply a data warehouse for insights and reporting. It was an operational platform where calculations for financial results were being used. It was integrated with line of business applications like Salesforce and some supply chain systems and that sort of thing. You just couldn't unpick it. So what they thought they were replacing, they weren't. They could replace the bits that were around insight and analytics, but they couldn't replace the other bits. So you end up with this estate that's quite complicated and convoluted. The other challenge that you have is people leave. So the people that knew the legacy thing have gone, and then no one knows it, so no one dares touch it, which is something that happens really, really often. And the second thing, actually, on the second sort of big one there on data quality and data governance, is not just because of that legacy and complicated estate, but that's certainly a big. Those two come together quite a lot, which is legacy technology, but also a bit of a mess in terms of data and quality inside those systems. And then there's some work needed, obviously, to sort of clean that up and unpick that.
100%. I'm gonna pick up on that second layer down actually. Um, I find the conversation around quality, data quality and data governance one of the most frustrating. I mean, fundamentally, I actually think it's one of the hardest challenges to solve in data. And some data governance leads and heads of data governance have got the toughest job in my mind because it's such a horizontal problem across the whole organization.
Yeah, yeah.
You've got to do inspiration, you've got to do effective frameworking, you've got to do delivery, you've got to do education. Like it's such a multifaceted job, the role of the governance manager. So I've got a lot of sympathy with governance managers, but I also think that too often the conversation I hear is that quality and governance can be solved through technology, when actually the thing I'll always come back to is, especially if you're in an environment that doesn't have an Internet of Things machine or sensor based
Mm,
input, 95% plus of data in most organizations is created by the human beings who either interact internally or externally with them. So data quality and governance is a human problem. And I think actually massively, the more literate a business gets, the more its quality improves, the more its data is better governed because people actually care about it and they understand the value it's going to drive.
yeah,
But I think the other thing that I would say from this visual, and I'm sure your opinion on this is as strong as mine, the thing that blows my mind about this visual is that the biggest blockers not being an unclear ROI or business case for investment. 6% of people in businesses over 500 million, and 0% of organizations in less than 500 million, even though halfway up you've got leadership alignment, which has higher, even though higher up you've got budget resource
yeah.
constraints, it's like number three. What is the disconnect between the data and AI industry understanding the need for clear ROI and the need for a clear return and like something that people can see and understand, and how that links to leadership alignment and how that links to budget constraints? Because there's just a massive disconnect between the upper middle of this visual and obviously that point there.
Yeah. I think that points to um, the mindset of kind of the industry actually in terms of what its responsibilities are. So I don't think this necessarily says that unclear ROI isn't a blocker. I just don't think people necessarily see ROI as their responsibility necessarily, and that sort of brings it full circle to the question really, because there's a question here about responsibility and accountability and ownership for ensuring that the investment that's made um, produces some results. Now, what results are we after? What results we should be after is whatever it is that the organization is trying to achieve strategically or operationally. And that's sort of very, macro. We're trying to grow, we're trying to move into new markets, like whatever, like really high. Or it's something quite specific, like we have a specific problem in this customer segment with retention rates in this product line. And that's like a really specific challenge that we're trying to achieve. Um, and and we look at it, it gets looked at the wrong way around. It gets looked at in terms of technology and data and people and training and the things we need to do to get better. I call them capabilities, and the results that we're trying to achieve. Now, who owns both of those things? Typically, data leaders, chief data officers, and their teams own the budget for building the thing. Bringing in technology, engineering, data sets, cleaning up data quality routines and rules, training the organization. They're kind of like developing the muscles in the organization to be good at something and then being judged on or not the return that's delivered when someone else has got the responsibility to do the change and implement the action. So it's a disconnect with ownership is one of the things. I also think that data functions aren't particularly held to account up front to the impact that the investment's looking to make. And I think there's been a bit of a leap of faith because of we talked about this earlier actually, because of the hype that if we invest, that will surely be good, be result in good things without the clear understanding of what it would take for the organization at large to do in order to see that hype through to a positive conclusion. So there's kind of like how do you connect those? We use this phrase return on data investment. It's sort of like a build on ROI,
Yeah.
which says, well, for every pound what the RODI, we call it the RODI, is going to be, or at least we have an understanding of what we're trying to achieve, and then we measure against that. And it's that kind of line of sight that then allows you to understand whether you've been successful and earn the right to then get some more budget to continue that cycle through.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest blind spots still in the industry. And who is our vice president of products and strategy, who obviously you know and I know. he often gives this analogy of why we as an industry have to get so much better at this. And I like the idea of roadie. And it's because, especially in certain industries and certain businesses, there is an understood value in some things that are built. He always refers to a bridge. So you spend a load of money on a bridge, you know what you're trying to achieve. Person getting from island A to island B, as long as it holds up, is safe, you've achieved the value that was expected to be delivered. The problem with data and AI is at the moment, for the commercial leaders who are saying yes to the budget, and I think you're absolutely right, they're almost like taking a punt on it a lot of the time. Like it's been promised by the industry, it's been promised by the big influencers within the industry, within commercial industry as well. I mean, like Gartner and the Big Four, all and McKinsey will all tell you that data and AI can deliver value. Um, but because there isn't a bridge there where it's clearly taking people from point A to point B, it's a lot more blurry about what they will understand to being the value after. And therefore, the job of the data office and the data leader is to, in essence, build the bridge and give them something very clear and well understood that they can say, I understand how numbers work in my business and that that data project has delivered numbers. So I
Yeah.
think it's
Well, I go a step further because I don't think it is just the responsibility of data folk to build the bridge. I think it's also to explain the value of having the bridge and
agree.
what being able to get from A to B would get you. So the similar analogy that I've used, I used at an event recently was the building of the Elizabeth line. There was some value attributed to that. More people being able to get around London quicker, more people into the city, more spend in shops. Like there'll be a spreadsheet somewhere that has calculated the impact that that will have and the cost of doing it. But there's also all the halo benefit of it once you've got it. You know, the new shops that were built around the areas, the better access to areas that weren't accessible before means more communities, means more housing. All of these things, they knew that up front before they
Yeah.
started digging one pavement slab or whatever. And it will have had some benefits since it's been built. They didn't even think of brilliant, like even better. You can like bank those. But you've got to know. I think you've got to know what value you're looking to achieve. You've got to know why you're building the bridge and what being able to go from point A to point B will ultimately allow you to do. And it's more than just having a safe bridge. That's sort of like the bare minimum here. So so I think that, and I don't think that happens enough. And I think that we've got to get much better at being clear on what that is, and only investing, to be honest, only investing the things where we know the answer.
Yeah.
It's only investing the things where we know that answer.
And to your analogy there about the Elizabeth line, the other thing that like it won't have been the engineer who built the Elizabeth line and designed the strategy for the Elizabeth line who did all that analysis, right? Like they'll have invested in economists and they'll have partnered with economists. They'll have like taken all that insight around the commercial value from outside of the data office, which again, I think is something that data offices can be really poor at. Like meaningfully engaging their executive peers to say, do you agree with the maths on this value that will be returned? Do you sign this off as well? And if it does deliver that value, then we're both celebrating and we both look great. If it doesn't, then that's also on us because you agreed with the assessment that more shops around Liverpool Street would help us and all that type of thing. So I think we've got to you've got to look at how well and I don't know, you could argue that a lot of data projects are more HS2 than they are they are the Elizabeth line and will never actually get to value potentially. But the analogy is a really good one actually. So it's what would somebody do when they were setting that project up, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I've just noticed that Rich in the Q&A has asked a great question. I think it's sort of saying, and Rich shout back if I get this wrong, but I think you're saying essentially, are we getting too much budget too soon, and therefore you've essentially you've set that expectation very high, and there's too much pressure on return because of the investment that you're looking to make. And I think it's a really good point because I'm a big advocate for start small and scale and only invest on the things that are proven to be valuable to an organization. And now you can only do that if what you're investing in is the delivery of value. If you're investing in building infrastructure, then you're always in this problem cycle of, well, I need to finish building the infrastructure before I can show you value. But if we're in the market of building, solving the problem that I came up with earlier of, customer retention being down in a certain market segment, then you've almost got no problem with demonstrating ROI because you're directly working on a business problem that needs fixing by deploying models and bringing in data sets and cleaning them up so that they're good enough in order to solve that problem. So if we can only do that if we work in that way. But yeah, I think I've used this phrase I think a couple of times in this already. But you got to earn the right to get the money, and sometimes I think through courage and trust, and new person in post is given money because that's the job to sort of build something, and then they find it challenging to kind of see any return because they haven't built the system around the return that they're looking to achieve.
I mean, as well, if you were being probably a bit brutal about it, I think a lot of people take a lot of pride in saying that they own this amount of budget and they own this amount of people, and there's like almost a bit of a building your kingdom that then sets you up to fail. Because I think, like with anything in life, and I think it's such a good question as well, by the way. If you go in, don't ask for like I like this. There's a thing with Stephen Hawking around why he was so happy, because the satisfaction gap is the difference between your expectations and reality. And very early in his life, he felt his reality would be either an early passing or a very limited life. So actually, every day in his adulthood was a massive bonus because the expectation was so low and the reality was life. Um, any business you go into, if you want to satisfy people, say you like prove that you can do a lot with not very much, and
Mm.
you'll have the keys to the castle from that point. Because then people will say, oh, that person came in 18 months later, they'd solved a real problem for us. It didn't cost us the earth. It's cheaper than what my peers in my Gartner network are telling me they've spent on data and AI this year, kind of thing. And all of a sudden, you've set yourself up for a much better position by not over asking for budget, I think is a really sensible point.
There's a kind of point here about, how much did we spend on data and AI and how much return did we get is such a huge question. It's too broad in some ways. Um, we were brought into an organization. They're a kind of logistics and storage company, and they had quite a specific problem statement. The work we did was data work, so it's stuff you'd recognize. It was building a model and building some dashboards and showing some insight and that sort of thing. So the work we did was that stuff. But the problem statement was that they had the margins were being squeezed because of the energy to their customers, which typically they would have done a sort of blanket, year after year, they did a sort of blanket renewal across everybody. And the work that, so the problem statement they had was, well, how do we do these renewals without further eating into our margin problems that we got and seeing if we can close the gap? So the work that we did was to solve that problem, not build a data platform and build dashboards and build analytics and insights. It was to solve that problem. And we worked with the commercial team to solve the problem. And we were part of the team that were there to solve this problem. And what we did is build a sort of pricing model and different personalized pricing based on customers and their usage and how much they use, and all this sort of stuff, like really complicated model, and gave them some scenarios that they could then overlay into their renewal through the sales process. And that year they ended up 7.9% up on revenue and closed the margin gap that they had. So depending on how we tell that story, you either tell that story as we went into this company and they built a data platform and some dashboards and we built some models and we trained their team, or that's a story about how we closed the margin gap and helped improve the revenue for the year and happy days. So, and I think that's where the data industry needs to get to is being able to articulate the problems that they solve through the lens of the business challenges, not through the lens of the data challenges.
I think most people know anyway, but unlike Jason, who was a data professional in a past life, as well as still being one now, but in on the vendor side, my background is as a commercial leader. I wasn't in the data industry until about five or 6 years ago. And I can tell you for nothing, sitting there as the person who might sign off another project or another piece of work, all I heard there was it's a proper business problem, it's a business focused solution, and 7.9% uptick. Like that's what I hear. I don't care what was done underneath it. I don't care what the models look like. I get that there probably are some models, about all I need to understand. What I hear is I understand the problem. I understand that we're building a solution for it, and I understand that we've got a way to measure it afterwards, and that that measurement has delivered value. So not enough of that goes on. That's an absolutely brilliant story. So, how are you balancing your budget for capability supply, in essence, the technology, the type of stuff that people typically spend their money on, with your budget for capability demand? So, a
Mm,
champagne problem that I talk about a lot from a data and AI literacy perspective and a data culture perspective is this idea of over demand. So what if we can't meet the demand with supply? I'm like, there are about one data team in the world who is in that position. So, congratulations, you would be on a podium with them
mm,
because actually, most people are spending all their money on the top line of this insight and not on the bottom, which means that they're spraying and praying data products out to a business that hasn't asked for them. There isn't enough demand, and you've got too much supply in a lot of cases outside of the rubbishy problems that we don't actually want to solve, like I need more data in my spreadsheet or whatever. Actually, big problems that people want to be solving and should be
yeah.
solving. Um, there is not enough demand coming from the business to solve real problems. I actually had such an eye-opening conversation with the CFO recently, and the decision that the CFO and the COO were in the process of making was a material shift in their market position and their product position. And I said, like, oh, so at what point at what point did you engage the CDO with that problem and get help from their team? And the CFO's words were, that's a business problem. Why would I have spoken to the CDO? I don't understand. And I'm like, how are you making, like, how have we still got to a point where we are so not valuable to our business leaders that when they are making a material shift in their position, their core strategy,
Mm,
we still don't go to the data team first? And it's because until obviously they started working with us, which was a good sign. But yeah, I suppose the question that I always ask when I'm on stage is if you look at your budget and you've spent 10x this year on tech than you have on the people piece, like is it delivering the type of return you need it to and expect it to?
yeah.
So, what does your budget say? And Jason, I'll come to you because you're seeing that. I'm sure at this time of year you're involved in the types of conversations with CDOs about like what they're going to spend their money on next year and why they've gone down that route, and not only to spend it with you, I'm sure, but actually just to be a peer and support them in that way. So, with these stats on the screen, and it like I suppose especially the one on the right-hand side. By 2027, more than half of CDAOs will secure funding for data literacy and AI literacy programs, fueled by enterprise failure to realize generative AI value. That's a Gartner positioning. Um, but then on the other side, 66% of CDOs recognize culture as a problem. Only 16% are prioritizing data literacy. That was last year. Um, how are you seeing budgets evolve at the moment? Are we seeing a changing of the guard because we're kind of falling into that trough of disillusionment with AI, or are you still seeing new strategy, new technology platform, new AI budget for technology? What are you seeing in the market at the moment?
Yeah. It's a real mix, and actually, that Deloitte survey, those stats of people, lots of people recognizing it, but not a lot of people prioritizing spend on it. We got that in last year's data leadership survey that we ran, and the early results of this year's are saying pretty much the same thing. So there's and I so the reason people want to recognize that it's a challenge is because of this issue that money's been spent and the benefit hasn't been realized. So, well, how do we realize the benefit? Well, let's educate the people that can now take all of these things that we've built and do something with them. Sounds really sensible. Um, I don't really understand the reason why
not that many people are prioritizing the spend. If I'm honest, it's actually more it seems to be a more easy place for people to show progress. Actually, education, there's obviously huge demand from employees to be trained and educated in things, particularly with AI wrapped around it. I think there'll be people will be chomping at the bit for that. It's a good, recruitment tool to say investments are being made in talent and all those good things. So it makes a lot of sense to do that. But I think the thing that's probably pushing it down is the need or the perceived need to prioritize investment in foundations. And we saw earlier about the blockers of things like legacy tech and data governance and those things. So they that gets pushed down because people are worried about going, training people up before they're able to do anything. And if you train, I've seen this in many instances actually. There's a sort of I'm sure you see this more, but this perfect balance of like when the pace that you educate people and the need for them to be able to use that
Yep.
learning in real time. Otherwise, it gets, it was a nice course and you don't get much from it. So I'm seeing that a lot. And yeah, I think it's important. I mean, the only other thing I'd say here actually is that there's a difference between a very close relationship and sister to this, but between data literacy and culture. I think education and people having the skills required is one element of creating a culture that you need, and that culture point um, is typically one that's kind of broad and extreme. There's a lot of change that's required, and that needs to be both top down and bottom up in terms of executive sort of sponsorship, leadership, behaviors, showing what their expectations are and showing what good looks like, but also people in the front line using data and decision products that have been built to really change and transform something that happens day to day. Because you don't get culture change without seeing the change bit happen. You don't demonstrate what you want to take place. So yeah, I think that's where I'd sort of like my reflections on that one.
100%. And I mean, I hear these conversations in real time every day, right? Like, oh, well, the problem we've got is we've spent 75 million quid on this kind of technology platform, and now we've got no budget left for the people. It's like, okay, do you
Yeah.
think that's where the problem started? Because I think it could have been. I think it could have been the budget conversation you had 18 months ago, where your challenges really kind of probably I could have forecast them for you without any kind of technology or AI. So I think one of the things that I will be incredibly, not only would it be exceptional for our business if Gartner's 2027 view is different from 2024 view. But I probably don't believe the 2027 view at the moment. I think it's more likely that people will try and fix this problem the same way they always have. Different consultancy, different technology platform, whatever it might be. But I live in hope. I think it'll be very good for our business if people do start to see that the way to make this work at enterprise is to bring the people and spend some money there. But I think I live in hope of a Gartner 2027 vision.
I do think there's quite a difference between AI, sort of literacy and education in AI versus literacy and education in data.
Agree.
In the probably the way I'd categorize that is data is more about the kind of insights, understanding how to make a decision based on data sets and what's happened historically, and use that to derive some predictions. I think that's the data side. AI side I think is quite different. I think it's a little bit more generative AI based,
Yep.
and probably agentic AI if it continues going that way, which is actually a very different thing. So I do think that we'll see that that there's two different routes, all required, both required, I should say, all required. But yeah, probably need something slightly different in each case.
Yeah, I think that is such an interesting challenge that we face right now because not we Data Literacy Academy, because for total clarity, we do both data and AI literacy, and all of our programs now definitely include both, if not more leaning towards AI. But I think the way I see it is that if the dependency within the industry becomes Gen AI, agentic AI, it's going to solve some real kind of operational, niggly pains that people face every day, and it's definitely going to make them more efficient and they'll earn some time back and all that type of thing. But fundamentally, it's still going to be insights led from data. and more complicated AI that really solve the big problems that businesses face in. And I still hope that we're not going to get so obsessed with Gen AI as an industry and the fact that it has a more kind of I can feel the impact of it tomorrow type of feeling. And we're going to forget that actually the real big problems we're going to solve are going to come from good to great data insights and good to AI, good to great machine learning and deep learning and that type of thing. So yeah, it's a hope, but whatever happens in 2027, I'll be glad of it if it means that more people are coming on the journey. So we touched on this earlier, but I think a good set of questions to be asking and seeing if you are a data leader, have you truly got the horizontal peer support for these things, which is shared accountability, not just shared ownership of data in the functional sense, but is the whole leadership team truly behind? We know where we're going to get value from. We know we're part of achieving that value. We know that you are helping us to achieve that value together. Same with AI ownership and obviously in the more traditional sense as well there. Um, Not enough CDOs are willing to spend their own money, but if you're not willing to spend your own money, do you have a specific L&D budget? And that's actually to say some people only can spend L&D budget on literacy. I think that's a bit of a problem, actually. We typically see programs are more sustainable and deliver more value when they're driven by data office budget because it's a data office problem really that's going to create the change and allow the value to be extracted and people to keep their jobs. And then what are your relationships like with key stakeholders? Um, these are just some things to think about. Like, if you look in the mirror, do you truly believe your answer to these questions is the right one? And if it isn't, how are you going to fix them? What do you need to do to fix them? Jason told a brilliant story earlier that would fix a lot of the problems around shared accountability and shared stakeholder buy-in. Because I can imagine in that business you described earlier, Jason, where 7.9% uptick in performance in a difficult period, there were loads of C-suite members who wanted to put their name to that program. It wasn't just the CDO and the CIO who were like, yeah, this is our thing. I bet there was customer directors, sales directors who were like, we're all part of this, guys. We're all part of this. It's on my scorecard.
Yeah, it's a coalition. I mean, there is a and it's a part of this as well. Is there is a you can't double bubble. You can't say everyone earned that benefit because it just doesn't stack up that way. But I think with where I see this work best is where there's a really grown up CFO and the supporting groups that are responsible. And if you can have that grown up conversation about, well, we're all working towards this common goal, big or small, then the attribution of value comes a lot clearer. And there's, it depends on the maturity as well. So if you're an early stage organization in terms of like haven't really properly invested yet in driving data change through the organization, then this roadie metric becomes a tool to articulate the value you're trying to achieve and win budget. But actually, if you're at the other end of the spectrum, you're a kind of digital and data native. No one's reporting the return on data investment. They're just reporting on valuable business things happening, and the contribution of the groups that are there are sort of usually quite laser focused. So depend, and there's a sort of middle ground of where you're sort of in the transition mode. So I think it depends where you are, but you've got to have that relationship across the groups of people that work together, that collaborate to drive the outcome. Otherwise, you're either trying to justify your existence, or you're constantly like trying to grab hold of pockets of value that happen because you want to kind of prove that something's there. So
And you've fundamentally, in your own right, got to understand how value is delivered. Like, if
yeah,
you don't truly understand, and if you're in a head of data governance or a head of analytics or a God forbid, head of data or CDO role, and you can't genuinely look in the mirror and say, I absolutely understand how a P&L works, how growth works, etc., you're going to really struggle to articulate the bits of value that you've contributed, right? I think there's as much responsibility on the data office to improve their true business commercial acumen as there is on the business to learn about data and AI.
100%.
Just some more questions to ask. We can obviously cover these probably in a different session, maybe because I'm conscious of time and Q&A. But how are you measuring that more insights are leading to better actions? How are you measuring that better actions are leading to better outcomes? I think one thing we observe is that data offices are very keen on measuring outputs, less good at measuring outcomes. And the business cares about outcomes. It doesn't care how many dashboards have been created, how many products have been deployed, how many people even really have adopted those. It's what have they done that's measurable off the back of them. And that difference between outputs and outcomes is poorly understood, I would say, across industry. And we want to be talking about outcomes from a value realization perspective. So, how to build a balanced budget model? Obviously, your budget model should be based on your current position in maturity, like Jason mentioned there, and the things that are going to drive key value. Um, and by the way, the premise of this session is not to tell you that you shouldn't be spending money on technology. Of course, that is what you should be spending money on as well. However, we would just argue that if you've got more of a kind of 80-10-10 type budget here, or a 70-10-20 type budget, which might be more common, you're probably not going to achieve what you want to achieve, and you're not going to be evidencing the value. And more than anything, you're not going to have an audience that understands the value, because there is a certain level of people literacy, culture, and change that has to take place for your senior leaders who've signed off on the budget in the first place to actually understand it. Because I think going into the whole premise with what Jason said earlier about people are signing budget off at the moment, often on a whim, on a punt, because they've been told that they should, and they don't really understand what's going to be realized. It's actually that people, culture, and change piece that allows them to understand what's been delivered and understand when you're painting the picture of the bridge that you've delivered or the Elizabeth line that you've delivered, that actually they get it, and they can say, yeah, I understand how the work you've done's led to that change, that 7.9% uplift or whatever it might be. So, from a budget checklist, clear business outcomes and owners, have you verified with your leadership peers that if we deliver this, they agree that that budget will have paid itself back and that you will be responsible for that? Have you planned in your skills and culture uplift? Do you have a clear way and a framework for measuring that outcome downstream? I would personally, genuinely, be investing in a value realization team or a value realization professional if I was a data office, because just like our business, where we have just hired a value realization team, the hardest thing we have got right now to do in data is prove that we're valuable. So why are you not spending 50, 60 grand of your multi-million pound budget on a person to do that for you in a really smart way, getting into the business, getting wider, um, and keep it simple until you know that you are going to deliver value. Because the more complicated you go with your budget, the more difficult it is to say, we are going to give real clarity on X, Y, and Z that we're going to deliver if you invest A, B, C. And all of a sudden you end up in a bit of a mess where you've spent money on things that you just can't really explain why you've spent them. And with 4 minutes left, does anybody have any questions? No, I can't see the Q&A anyway, so I'll
Take some time for people to
depend on
type.
you and Sarah.
Nothing through just yet.
Okay, cool. If there's no questions, there's no questions. We will obviously.
We got one.
Oh,
And one through.
Yep.
what's the key thing in AI literacy? I'm going to need more than that, Rich. I mean, like if I was to say, if I was to answer that question, outright as it's written, I don't think I'm going to give you the best answer or what you maybe mean, but I will say, for me, the biggest problem we still face is that there is a lack of understanding around art of the possible within our people. So most people can't really articulate what they want to achieve from AI or even get their head around what they could achieve with it, which means that actually them then going on a literacy journey is quite difficult. So we do a lot of kind of framing of use cases, framing of problems that can be solved with AI. So at a foundational level, just answering that question outright, I'd always say that we need people to understand what could happen if they learn and if they got this right, when actually at most at the moment they just think they can write a better agenda for their meeting or summarize a meeting note better. But like what problems could they solve would always be my number one. But if that doesn't quite answer your question, I'm also happy to take a follow-up on that and try and give you a better answer.
Yeah, let me a small build from me on that one as well is, and it's sort of similar, is how AI will make an individual's world better. Like that's really, so it's not really about the AI, it's about how can they be they're trying to achieve because of this capability they've been given.
Agree. Cool. Well, I'll give everyone 2 minutes to get to their next meetings. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, it was a useful conversation. I personally enjoyed it. I think there's a few things I'm going to take away from Jason's side of this conversation. So, really, really appreciate people giving the time. And if you want to get in touch with either of us, oh, fine. Yeah, good, Rich. Yeah, if you want to get in touch with either of us, we are both probably too busy on LinkedIn, would be my guess for most people's liking. But if you do connect with us on your head, be it because you'll get served loads of content. But we are on LinkedIn. We do love to connect, and we will of your Tuesday, and I will speak to you all at some point in the future, I hope.
Thanks all.
Bye, guys.